Thank you for so much for accepting our invitation to teach. Jampa has been teaching Buddhism for over 30 years. He is American by birth. He was a monk in the Tibetan tradition for 17 years and studied for over 15 years in India at the Tibetan Library of Works and Archives at the Buddhist School of Dialects, in the Buddhist School of Dialects. He then spent 1 year in Thailand meditating in the Veda tradition, and in 2005 completed a solitary 1 year retreat at Ling Retreat Center in Spain. He has served as a resident teacher and translator at Buddha House and Vajrayana Institute in Australia, and was the teaching assistant in the first 7-year FPMT master's program for Buddhist studies in Italy. And he now lives in Sydney, Australia. So thank you.
Thank you for that. You know, when I wrote out that bio, um, I was very impressed by all those credentials. Who are they talking about? It was, it's, you know. Anyway, I won't go there. Um, anyway, thank you, Zella. Thank you for inviting me to share a few words about Dharma, especially around the Four Immeasurables. And we're going to get to that because over the years, I've become less and less abstract and theoretic about my practice, and hopefully more practical in trying to integrate it into my everyday life, to leave a better life for both myself and others in some ways, to be a benefit to both myself and to others. And I think in this way, that something like the Four Immeasurables is a very practical approach to improving the quality of our everyday life. So that's quite, I guess, the focus of my interests. As Zella mentioned, I attended for about 7 or 8 years the Buddhist School of Dialectics in Dharamsala. And sometimes it's referred to as the Buddhist School of Dramatics. I don't know if you've ever seen the monks debating where they clap very loudly and they scream at each other. And sometimes we would, you know, each day we would have a lecture of about an hour and a half, and then we would debate on that subject matter for about 3 hours every day, 6 days a week. And sometimes it became extremely abstract. You know, we would meditate on whether it should be a comma or a period after a particular sentence, and the difference in syntactics, what that difference in meaning would be. And it became rather ethereal, you know, kind of out there somewhere. So I only say that over the years I've become a little more grounded, I think, and practical in my approach to Buddhism and my approach to my own personal practice. And I think these four immeasurables are part of that practicality. So I'm very excited about presenting them, and I thank you for inviting me to present them. Okay. So, firstly, there's, I think, one of the foundations of Buddhism, one of the fundamental principles, is not so much why we do what we do. It's not so much what we do, but why we do what we do. You know, the reason behind and the purpose for. That is to say, our motivation. Whether you're listening to me and the time spent together is going to be valid, it's going to be of use to ourselves, whether it's going to help us to solve our problems or just become another activity within our already probably overly busy lives, is very much dependent upon your motivation. And in that regard, I'd like to, if I can, Zella, I'd like to bring up something on this quotation to share with you, okay? So if we can do that. Okay, I just have to, I'm going to share my screen. And I'm going to have to bring it up. Can you see it on the screen?
Yes, we can.
Okay, so it's an autobiography in 5 parts, and it sort of goes through the evolution of a particular individual from, I think it's self-explanatory, and I'd like to read through it with you. So it's all in a way of developing a motivation for what we're about to do. So, autobiography in 5 parts. I walk down the street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I fall in. I am lost. It isn't my fault. It takes forever to find a way out. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I pretend I do not see it. I fall in again. I can't believe I'm in the same place. But it isn't my fault. It still takes a long time to get out. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I can see it there. I still fall in. It's a habit. My eyes are open. I know where I am. It is my fault. I get out immediately. I walk down the same street. There is a deep hole in the sidewalk. I walk around it. And the 5th part is, I walk down another street. So, there's this individual who keeps falling into the same holes in their life. Whatever these holes might be for each of us personally, we can reflect upon that. And the same mistakes, the same habitual misconceptions that we have about where our happiness lies and where our problems come from and so forth. So initially we don't see ourselves as accountable. But over time we begin to understand that the part that we're playing in the predicaments that we continually keep finding ourselves in, time after time after time, in one way or another. So we start taking responsibility for the quality of our life in some way, what's happening for us. And gradually we develop some abilities in recognizing the holes in our life, what they are for our particular selves. And we hopefully begin to develop some skills around and the motivation to climb out of those holes, even when we find ourselves at the bottom of them. And then finally, eventually, we begin to avoid many of the holes in our life, and we begin to explore other possibilities, other streets to walk down. And I think, that's what we're very much doing in our practice, exploring other possible streets and use, which might lead us more in the direction of the quality of life that we, in some way or another, whether we can articulate or not, that we want for ourselves. But, we can go further in terms of our motivation, in the sense that there's a sequel to this story. Again, someone has fallen into one of the many holes in their life. And they're at the bottom of this hole, and they're calling out for help. And lots of people are walking by. Some don't hear the man's cry. Other people hear it, but they don't pay any attention. They choose to ignore it, and they keep on walking. After some time, a doctor comes along, and he hears the man crying from the bottom of his particular hole. Help me, help me. And he comes to the edge of the hole, and he peers down, and the man yells up, "Please help me, help me, help me." And the doctor takes out a pad of prescriptions, writes out a prescription for a tranquilizer, and throws it down into the hole. And he says, "Oh, this should help," and walks off. But the man's still in the bottom of his hole, and he keeps yelling up, and people are walking by. And finally, a clergyman hears him yelling up out of the bottom of his hole. And he comes down, he peers from the edge of the hole down into the hole, and the man yells up, "Help me, help me, help me." And so the clergyman, he pulls out a laminated prayer, and he throws it to the bottom of the hole. And he says, "This should help." And the clergyman walks off. But the man's still at the bottom of his hole. Finally, the man's still at the bottom of his hole yelling, "Please help me." And a man comes to the edge of the hole, peers down, and he hears the man's cry for help. And immediately, spontaneously, he jumps down into the hole. And now he's with the man, and the man says to him, I feel very relieved that you're down in this hole with me, but now we're both in the same hole. And the man says, yes, but I've been here before, and I know a way out. So, the moral of that story is that the greater the skills that we develop in helping ourselves out, the greater the skills that we have to be able to be a benefit to others. And that becomes, that our individual and personal self-development can find an integration into helping a troubled world. We're not uniquely individuals with our own personal problems, but more than not, we have a commonality amongst ourselves. And the greater that we have in our abilities and the skills in helping ourselves, that much more we have to offer. And the more I am, the more I have to give. And I think that's the basis of the Bodhisattva path. That we can self-assertion and self-integration, social, individualism and social responsibility, find some kind of union in the Bodhisattva's path. By developing ourselves, we have that much more that we can be a benefit to others. And so this becomes the motivation behind our practice. So I'd like to, if we can, I can either bring it up or I can share it on the screen if you like. Oh, you're going to screen it. Okay, that's great. So if you'd like just to recite it in English, the generation of our intention, where we would like to go in our lives, and the reason for that. It's just not for, as Lama Yeshe used to say, for our own piece of chocolate cake, but to be of ever-widening use to others. And I think that we find the great meaning and purpose in our life, the quality of our life. So if you'd like to recite together, I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. I go for refuge until I'm enlightened to the Buddha, the Dharma, and the Supreme Assembly. By the merits I create through listening to the Dharma, may I become a Buddha in order to benefit all sentient beings. Okay. I want to put these four immeasurables into some kind of context. We're working, there are two, we're trying to develop our intelligence. I mean, that's perhaps an unusual word to make use of, but however we want to look at it, both our cognitive, our ability to understand, to gain insight, to comprehend, to reason clearly, accurately, but also our emotional intelligence. I think we're trying to develop both of those aspects to ourselves. There's intelligence in our emotions. For example, one of the emotions that I think is developed through the Four Immeasurables, when we develop the immeasurable of empathetic joy, is the ability to empathize, being able to imagine how another person feels, to be able to experience something similar to what they must be going through. That in itself is a matter of intelligence, but we can bring intelligence to our emotions as well. This is the nature of our practical wisdom that we've developed through our life experiences, what works and doesn't work. You have empathy, perhaps. You want to help someone. You know what they're going through. What is the best way to respond? So you have the emotion, but how do you translate that emotion into skillful means? And that requires some degree of practical wisdom to develop through our own life experiences. So we're talking about emotions and how to apply them best or most skillfully in our life. And you know, I like to place them in some kind. These four emotions of the immeasurables are extremely wholesome emotions, and what we mean, I think, within Buddhism about what is virtuous, what are wholesome emotions, what are healthy emotions, as compared to distorted emotions, emotions which aren't working in our own or others' best interests. So, how do we distinguish between skillful emotions and unskillful emotions, positive emotions and negative emotions? So, I think we can use, there are various criteria we can make use of. I think, for one thing, in the West, one way I think is properly, the distinction which is popularly made in the West between emotions, whether they feel good or not. For example, attachment, say, to a beautiful body, to a beautiful person. It makes us, there's a certain feeling, a good feeling. It's pleasurable, as opposed to maybe an emotion like sadness, where we feel flat, we feel down, we feel uh, depressed in some way. That doesn't feel good. So therefore, it's conceived of as a negative emotion, as undesirable emotion. So generally in the West, our how we our emotional repertoire, the emotions that we draw on, are very much distinguished in terms of whether they make us feel good and therefore are positive, or whether they make us feel down, bad, and therefore are seen as negative. And this makes a difference because our evaluations of our emotions determine which emotions we naturally reinforce, that we invite into our lives, that naturally get expressed more often in our life, and those emotions which we tend to restrict, which we see as negative, which we see as bringing us down in some way, and therefore we ignore or we push down, or those emotions we invite and those emotions we restrict. And this becomes our way of life in how we determine the quality of our emotions. Buddhism uses, I think, a very different criteria for distinguishing emotions. What are skillful emotions? What are unskillful? What are virtuous, positive, whatever terms we want to make use of? It's not in whether the emotion makes us feel good, or whether, in some ways it makes us, it's an unpleasant feeling, but in terms of whether it is both beneficial and warranted. This is, can I, I'm afraid to call up another share screen, but let's just talk about that. In distinguishing between positive and negative emotions, Buddhism is using a different criteria than what is popularly used in the West. If in the course of our discussions together, if you don't agree or if you have some comment, question, please let me know, okay? If I'm not clear, or perhaps you don't agree with what I'm saying, by all means, let's bring it up. Let's share what wisdom that we all have, and bring and make this sessions as meaningful as we can together. So, in distinguishing between positive and negative emotions, Buddhism is, I think, using a different criteria than what is popularly made use of in the West. The distinction is not made in terms of whether the emotion feels good or not, but whether it's seen as warranted and beneficial. And this is it would take about to untease what we mean by each of these two terms. Beneficial from the point of view, in just very, very concise terms, very short, from the point of view of whether the emotion serves to perpetuate or free us from our problems, and therefore our suffering. or, and warranted from the point of view of whether the emotion is in keeping with the actual nature of the object that we view. Okay? Beneficial from whether or not the emotion helps, perpetuates our problems, serves to extend them, supports them, a problematic way of life, or whether it helps to, in some way or another, to begin to solve our problems in a skillful way, in a skillful manner, whether it begins to free us from a lot of our difficulties, our suffering, and so forth. As that in terms of benefit. And then warranted is whether or not the emotion is in keeping with the actual nature of the object. One aspect of negative emotions is that they're all wrong consciousnesses. It's another elaborate explanation, perhaps, in terms of Abhidharma, but all, attachment, hatred, and ignorance are all wrong consciousness. They're distorted consciousness. They're not seeing their object for what it really is in its actual nature. And therefore, there's a misfit. Our approach to that object is in some way inexact, is distorted. That's what we mean by the word, we don't use it so often in Tibetan Buddhism, dukkha. It's generally translated as suffering. But actually, during the Buddha's time, the Buddha lived in an agrarian culture. And so many of the terms, the metaphors that he used in communicating his understanding, his awakened state to his audience, was in terms of the terminology which was made of use in those days. And so he used the word dukkha, which comes from the Sanskrit. It originally meant a wheel that grinds on its axle. There's a misfit. Yeah. So he said he was a great communicator. That was one of his geniuses. That he didn't teach the subject, he taught the student. What was in keeping with that particular student at that particular time along their path. He was trying to communicate. And so he was saying life is problematic in the sense that we always experience some kind of dukkha, a bit of a misfit. It kind of wears on us. There's a friction. It's problematic. And so this is where this notion of negative emotions comes in. There's a misfit, and any action arising out of that is not quite accurate in solving the difficulty or attaining the happiness that we're looking for. There's always some inexactness. So there's dukkha. It becomes problematic. Life becomes difficult in that way. Okay, we okay so far? I haven't even gotten on subject matter yet. Okay, but I want to lead up to that. Anything, comments about what I've said so far? Thoughts, additions, subtractions? Okay. So what we're saying is that it's a very pragmatic approach. What works and doesn't work in terms of happiness and suffering. This was the criteria that the Buddha made use of in delineating his path. What helps us, what frees us from suffering and helps us to find the happiness, at least how we presently conceive of it to be. Whether it be just some types of mundane happiness, we become better at working with our everyday life, or whether it's some type of more seemingly abstract liberation or enlightenment, whatever we view it, however we conceive of it. So it's a pragmatic approach, looking at what is actually beneficial and warranted in deciding how we are to live our emotional lives. And this is reflected in an important discourse by the Buddha. It's in the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon is the Buddhist canon is the traditionally accepted discourses of the Buddha. Generally it's made up of the sutras, the discourse of the Buddha, the Vinaya, the rules and regulations surrounding the monastic community, and then Abhidharma, or higher knowledge, and this the systematization of Buddhist teachings on cosmology, on psychology, and so forth. So when the Buddha visited a small town, it was called the town was called Kesaputta, and he was born in the Republic of Kosala. So and this town was inhabited with what's called the people who lived there were referred to as the Kalamas. And they questioned the Buddha. You know, they had all of these traveling teachers who would come through, and they would lecture, and they would give teachings on their particular method of spirituality and so forth. And the people would question, you know, this teacher said this, and this teacher said this. They were all proclaiming their doctrine as being the true right way to moksha, to liberation. And they would always be disparaging other doctrines. And so the Kalama says, you know, who are we to believe? And the Buddha, and I really appreciate this about him in this regard. In response, the Buddha said, yes, you're right. It's difficult. It's proper that you have doubts, because this teacher says this and this teacher said that. He said there's perplexity, you know, about what is true and what is not. Then he went on to say, and this is in this particular sutra, which is in the Pali Canon. The Pali Canon is mostly, it's accepted within the Mahayana, but it's mainly made use of in the Theravada tradition, for example, of Thailand, Sri Lanka, Cambodia, and so forth. He went on to say, don't be led by religious texts, nor by authority, nor by logic, nor by appearances, nor by the teacher, nor by your speculation. He said, when you know for yourself that certain things are wholesome, that certain things to be true within your own experience, that's what you should try. That's what you should accept for yourself. That's how what you should depend upon in leading your life. So, you know, I find that we can rely on our own experience. That we have to be able to evaluate our experience to determine whether it's valid or not. But once we think there's no reason to doubt my own experience, then we can begin to rely. We become the authority on how to lead our life. That's what the Buddha, I think the Buddha modeled that for us. He didn't accept the teachings of his day. He went from teacher to teacher, even after he renounced his royal family. He went from teacher to teacher and said, no, that's not quite what I'm looking for. That's not it. He became his own authority. And in certain respects, and that's why I admire him so much, he said we have to rely on our own experience. So he went on in this same discourse, which is called the address to the Kusalas, that he also taught, and this is where I'm leading up to, the Four Immeasurables, the immeasurable of love, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And that's what we're going to be talking about. So he went on to say in this sutta, again, and I find this remarkable, whether you believe in karma, whether you believe in rebirth or not, whether karma and whether rebirth exist or not, by practicing these four immeasurables, the extremely wholesome emotions, you will be benefited by happiness in this life. You can, and moreover, you can know that for yourself. You can experience that for yourself. You don't have to rely upon my word. Not by authority, not by religious text, but by means of your own experience. You can know the validity of this practice and become a happier person. And our own experience becomes our reliable source of what we come to practice. Okay, so that's kind of a lead-in to the Four Immeasurables. I was going to incorporate a short meditation in each of our sessions together. We haven't come to an explanation of the very first of the Four Immeasurables, immeasurable loving kindness. So can we meditate for about just 10 minutes? And we're just going, I'd like to lead you in a practice of mindfulness of the breath. Or you can meditate in any way. We'll just meditate for about 10 minutes, okay? And I'll take about 5 or 6 minutes and just go through a progressive relaxation, stepping outside the busyness of our general busyness of our minds and getting in touch with the relative stability of our bodies, and then focusing on the breath. So if you don't mind, can we do that for about 10 minutes? Okay. So I invite you to find a comfortable, firm, a quiet place. Taking a comfortable but firm posture. So I invite you to bring your awareness to the crown of your head, your scalp. And we can begin by imagining or actually feeling the wrinkles in your brow and your forehead smoothing out. The pressure in and around your eyes diminishing. The muscles of the face softening, relaxing. It's almost as if you can feel the gravity pulling your cheeks downward. Your tongue is soft and jaw relaxed. And bringing your awareness to the back of your neck and perhaps turning your head to each side a few times, very gently loosening, stretching the muscles of the back of the neck. And bringing your awareness down to your upper back and shoulders. And perhaps drawing your shoulders up towards your ears. And then slowly circling them to the back and downward and to the front. And just rotating your shoulders slowly a few times. And eventually, returning your shoulders back up toward your ears. And then just allowing them to drop comfortably to the sides. And with that, the feeling as if some kind of burden or weight that you may have unknowingly been carrying around on your back over the course of the day, moving down and through your body into the ground. A feeling of relief. that burden's been lifted from your shoulders. See if you can get in touch with the feeling of cessation. And there was something there before, and now it's no longer there. And bringing your awareness all the way down to your hands. Your hands are soft and loose. And relaxing your lower arms. And your upper arms. So there's no formula, there's no description on how to do this. Just experiment. How would it feel if your arms were completely relaxed? What would that feel like? Just imagine that. And relaxing throughout the central space of the chest, the heart area. In the middle portion of your back. Stomach. And releasing the tension that we often hold on the stomach muscles, just allow your belly to go soft. And throughout the abdominal cavity. And keeping your trunk erect, relax your lower back muscles. And throughout the pelvic region. The upper legs. The lower legs. And finally your feet, soft and loose. So we're going to scan through the body once again from the crown down through the central portion of the body. So moving with awareness from the top of your head downward. And as you move slowly downward, notice any tightnesses or tensions which might remain in the body. When you come across an area of discomfort, of tightness, of tension, maybe in the back of the neck, the shoulders, upper back, wherever, breathing in through your nostrils and following that breath with awareness to wherever the tightness, the tension's being held in the body. Even if in fact the breath doesn't go there, just imagine it does, suffusing that area with the breath of awareness. And then as if breathing out from that same area, and with that out-breath, imagining or actually feeling some kind of release. The tension diminishes, the tightness loosens. So again and again breathing to those areas of tightness, of tension, again and again breathing out from those same areas. So there's a overall experience that with each out breath, the body is as if sinking deeper and deeper into a state of relaxation, of calm, of ease. It's a pleasant place to be in the body. So just staying with the body for a few moments, relaxed and at ease. So I invite you to become aware of the fact that you're breathing. And just now when you became aware of your breath, there was a physical sensation that you're naturally drawn to that indicates to you that you're breathing in and that you're breathing out. And just simply rest your attention, focus your awareness on the physical sensation associated with the natural breath. Bring your mind back to the breath. Okay. Um, so we're going to begin our discussion. How are we doing so far? Give me some feedback. Everybody happy?
I thought when you hit the bell, one of those planes was dropping a bomb on you.
I'm
Scared.
sorry. That's not a very pleasant way to come out of your meditation, is it? Sorry about that. Any other thoughts, comments? Okay, okay. As I said, please, by all means, it's we've all had there's a notion of practical wisdom, which I think is very useful, and one of the advantages of Sangha, a community of fellow travelers along the path, is that it gives us a chance to share the wisdom that we've all developed through our own experience, what's worked and what hasn't worked in our own lives. And sometimes just a word or two or an antidote that somebody shares can be of tremendous value. It can be greater value than perhaps the entire teaching that was given. That was the take home from that particular session together. So I think it's very useful. It can be practically valuable for us to share our comments or our observations and so forth. So by all means, yeah, I encourage you. So we're going to look at the four immeasurables. I think you all have there they are, as if by magic. Zella's on the ball here. Four immeasurables: immeasurable loving kindness, immeasurable compassion, immeasurable empathetic joy, and immeasurable equanimity. Okay, so to give you some background on the four immeasurables, as Zella mentioned in the introduction of myself, I spent a year in Thailand, practicing and meditating in the Thai tradition, or I should say Theravada tradition. So I learned a lot about, in combination with my studies in the Tibetan tradition, that I'm trying to draw on both traditions and make use of the teachings of. So in the Theravada tradition, these four, what we would say, extremely wholesome emotions are called, and they're also had this term in Tibetan, but generally referred to in the Theravada tradition as the four Brahma abodes, or the four abodes of Brahma, or the four divine abodes. So if you ever hear that term, they're more or less talking about the same subject matter. So these four immeasurables are found in all the various traditions of Buddhism, different schools of Buddhism, and different texts interpret them slightly differently. And in certain texts, in certain practices, in certain traditions, the order of the four immeasurables are changed. So in the Theravada tradition, the four Brahma abodes, they're called the Brahma abodes because they are thought to correspond to the four, within Buddhist cosmology, what we call samsara. The universe is driven by ignorance, if you like. There are 9 different levels. There's where we live, at least as far as Sydney goes, the desire realm, and then there are 4 concentrations, the 4 form concentrations and 4 formless concentrations. So these 4 form concentrations, these abodes, are said to be where the Brahma gods reside. And the Brahma god in the first concentration is absorbed in the meditation in immeasurable loving kindness. And it corresponds going up through the four concentrations, the four immeasurables. So, it's said that during the Buddhist time, a practitioner of the Brahmatic faith, the forerunner of Hinduism, approached the Buddha and said, how can I be? And one of the yearnings or the longings of those who practice in the Brahmatic traditions, the Vedas, would be to find union with Brahma, the universal God. And he said, how can I be assured that after my death I find union with Brahma? And the Buddha, and another reason I think, which I admire the Buddha, he wasn't, he was trying to help individuals. That was his main endeavor, I think. He wasn't missionizing, he wasn't trying to convert. So whatever would be a benefit. So he said, if you meditate on the four immeasurables, after death you can be assured of finding union with Brahma. So meditating on the immeasurable loving kindness, you will find union with Brahma, the first form concentration, and so forth. So therefore they're referred to as the four abodes of Brahma, or the four divine abodes. Brahma in Sanskrit means excellent or divine, something of pure, something like that. And then he went on to speak to his audience that of how to actually practice them. I'll bring up. It's from the Buddha. I'll my share screen. Hopefully, see how this works. So this is how the Buddha described the practice. A monk suffuses the world in the four directions with a mind of loving kindness, then above and below and all around, the whole world from all its sides, completely with a benevolent, all-embracing, great, immeasurable, peaceful, and friendly mind. Just as a powerful conch blower makes himself heard with no great effort in all four cardinal directions, so too there is no limit to the unfolding of this heart-liberating loving kindness. This is a way to communion with Brahma. So this is how the Buddha explained how to actually practice these four abodes. So I don't know if, I wish my practice was up to that, but anyway, it's something that we could sort of aim for in a way. So the Buddha then instructed the monks to follow this up with equal suffusion of the entire world with loving kindness, compassion, empathetic joy, and equanimity. And it's referred to as immeasurable because they are focused eventually. I mean, the goal is that they are to, as if seem to be directed toward immeasurable living beings in immeasurable directions. And because each of these various states of loving kindness and compassion and so forth are immeasurable in intensity, so therefore they're referred to as limitless or immeasurable. We can't quite measure them. We can't take them in to the extent of where they reach, something like that. So within the Buddhist tradition, within the Bodhisattva tradition, the four immeasurables they're mentioned in several sutras, the Lotus Sutra and the Great Non-Abiding Sutra. And they're interpreted differently in various schools of Buddhism. Even within the Tibetan tradition, they're presented in different fashion in terms of their various practices. For example, in the Abhisamaya Alankara, or the ornament for clear realization, Maitreya says that the four immeasurables are practiced after one develops bodhicitta, the awakened heart. That's my translation for bodhicitta, the awakened heart. Whereas Atisha said that the four immeasurables are practiced prior to the development of an awakened heart or bodhicitta. They're set out differently in different texts. In for example, in the Gluk tradition, if in the extensive six-session yoga by the first Panchen Lama, the immeasurable equanimity comes first. Here it's being presented as coming forth, and this will explain why this is the case, this difference. Okay, so that's kind of putting these practices in some kind of historical context, but also in terms of the actual practices within the text, the various texts that we might, and practices that we might engage in. So the first of the four immeasurables, immeasurable loving kindness, and it's expressed. May all beings have happiness and the causes of happiness. So the word for, since I was on the ball here, the word for loving kindness in Sanskrit is metri. In Pali is metta. Some of you are probably familiar with that term. Which metri literally means friend. So in Buddhism, the primary meaning of loving kindness is friendship, friendliness. The friendly wish that the being that we are focusing on be happy and be well. So this may be a person, it might be an animal, or it could be any type of sentient being. In practice, it is suggesting that we begin to cultivate loving kindness with ourselves. So I think we can come back to, so it's suggested that we begin with ourselves. And that for some, this can be quite surprising. It can be even uncomfortable. And I like to, there's a sutta in which the Buddha actually mentions this. And I'll bring that up very quickly. It's called the King Sutta. We can search, this is a discourse by the Buddha. We can search the tenfold universe and not find a single being more worthy of loving kindness than ourselves. We can search the tenfold universe and not find a single being more worthy of loving kindness than ourselves. So I think this is it's really pertinent in our society because, and I think that the Dalai Lama once commented on this when he first visited the West back in the early 60s. We seem to be particularly afflicted by low self-esteem and self-contempt. So almost it's like a self-denigration. There's really some basic confusion about our promise, about what our potential, what we could be. So in the practice of loving kindness, we are encouraged to initially focus on ourselves, wish ourselves happiness. There's in Shantideva, in A Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life, Bodhicharya Avatara, and speaking about, in the context of speaking about the awakened heart. And I might be overemphasizing, but nonetheless, I think it's useful that we have to begin with ourselves. That's, to a large extent, that's the only reality most of us can recognize at present. And if our practice is to have any solid grounding, it has to begin there. So this is what Shantideva says in his Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. If those beings have never before even dreamt of such an attitude for their own sake, how could it ever rise for the sake of others? If those beings have never before even dreamt of such an attitude for their own sake, how could it ever arise for the sake of others? So if we have never sincerely wished ourselves simply to be happy, like you say, put your arm around yourself and say, I like you. You're my best friend. I want to help you. To befriend yourself. I mean, it sounds unusual. It sounds rather abstract. It sounds unfamiliar, alien to ourselves, and to think in that way. But I think it's a necessary part of coming to terms with ourselves and befriending ourselves. If we don't, no matter how much we may wish and recite, may it be a benefit to others, if we can't generate that sincere wish toward ourselves, how can we sincerely wish that toward others, knowing our own inner experience intimately, directly, in the ways that we do? The point here is that a love for ourselves provides the most powerful basis for loving others. The love for ourselves provides, and by love, I mean, this word love has become so misused in the West that it hardly has any meaning any longer. And maybe just the word friendship. If we haven't befriended ourselves, how could we really be a friend to others? So in this context, and I always like to come back to a living authority on these teachings and what I say. And I'd like to, again, bring up a quote from the Dalai Lama with regard to this. So he's talking about loving ourselves. Love must begin with you. You have to love yourself, and then you will be able to expand the love you feel for yourself to embrace others. People who have no love for themselves will find it very difficult to love others. First and foremost, then, we need to begin by loving ourselves. Through understanding how others are just like us and how similar we all are, we can extend that love to others, appreciating on an ever-deepening level that they too wish to be happy and avoid suffering. So I think that's a very moving and powerful statement, especially coming from the Dalai Lama. Even an others-centered bodhisattva necessarily begins her or his own practice in terms of their personal self-interest. For the most part, that's our only reality that we can recognize. That's the only experience that we have directly for ourselves. And if our practice to be effective, it has to be grounded in that reality. But through practice, it doesn't stop there. That's the point. And that was the point of that autobiography in 5 points. At some point, we develop the skills to get out of our own holes, so that we can be of that much greater benefit in helping others to get out of theirs. That's always at the back of our minds, the back somewhere, the foundation of our practice. Our practice doesn't stop with ourselves. Ultimately, it ends with others and their interests as well. Caring about them and actively working for their welfare. But first, we have to develop a loving kindness for ourselves. We have to befriend ourselves, to sincerely wish ourselves well, to become friends with ourselves. And then we go on from there as a basis for those very close to us, maybe our immediate family and so forth. And then close friends, and then acquaintances, and then strangers. And finally, the most difficult group of individuals who we relate with, those who give us a hard time, who we have difficulties with, generally, and we might call them enemies, if you like, people who we harbor some hostility toward. We expand outwardly to include immeasurable beings, but we start with ourselves. Love, as well as compassion, are fundamental emotions. They came with the package. This, at base most, wishing ourselves well and wishing ourselves not to suffer. Approach and avoidance, This is almost what we mean by sentient life. And approaching that which it seems that to enhance our existence in some way, and avoiding that which we see as a threat to our existence in some way, from a single-celled organism up to the complexities of a human being. So it's not something foreign to ourselves. It's not something that we need to formulate. It's more of a sense of removing the obstacles, the resistance. What's stopping us from befriending ourselves? What stops us from befriending others? These emotions of love and compassion get buried under layers of low self-esteem and self-contempt. Yet through it all, self-love and self-compassion, they seep up and say, nevertheless, no matter how lousy I feel about myself, I still want to be happy. I still don't want to suffer. Even if I feel I'm completely worthless, I don't deserve to be happy. I deserve suffering, which in some people do feel that way. Tragically, they feel that way. Nonetheless, at some level of their being, they still want to be happy. They still don't want to suffer. We're always, I don't know, are we communicating okay? It's hard for me, not seeing too many faces, it's hard for me to read. Anyway, let's go from there. However unique to each of us, or are shared with the rest of the world, the happiness that each of us seeks, and no matter how skilled or unskilled we may be in going about achieving that happiness, all beings, including ourselves, have a natural desire for happiness, a natural desire not to suffer. It's innate. It's inescapable, a part of what it means to be a sentient being. I think it's to be acknowledged and embraced, this desire. The very root of our yearning for happiness and freedom from suffering is a fundamental expression of our basic sanity, our cognitive and emotional intelligence. It's like a seed that wants to grow into the sunlight. So sometimes this expression gets this desire for happiness and desire not to suffer, and sometimes it gets terribly twisted. It gets perverted, like when we exploit others for our own happiness and so forth. But nevertheless, it's still a fundamental urge of ourselves, something that's to be acknowledged and embraced about ourselves. So the point I'm trying to make here, in speaking in this way, is that instead of emphasizing how to develop a loving kindness, it's useful to ask, how do I stop doing what I do to stifle my warmth and openness? What gets in the way of my inclination toward kindness and connection with others? In other words, what is the resistance? If love and compassion are a natural emotion abiding within ourselves, what stops it from being expressed? So sometimes in the context of working with our selfishness and self-centeredness, we need to let go of ourselves. It's useful to stop focusing on and temporarily forget about ourselves. But sometimes it's our self-contempt, our feelings of unworthiness that are our immediate problem, and our healing only comes through kindness directed toward ourselves. The self that we're the struggling self, which we may be rejecting in some way. So we can understand how we can treat ourselves. Any gestures of kindness, of generosity, of patience, of understanding what to say of compassion that we direct toward ourselves will naturally be reflected in how we treat others. What we do for ourselves in this way, we're doing for others as well. So that with this kind of understanding, I think we can better approach the teachings that instruct us to forego selfishness and diminish our self-centeredness, and balance that with the need for self-love. So I'm saying all of this to overcome some hesitancy in individuals that I shouldn't be concerned with ourselves, that somehow not in keeping with the teachings to be, it's like the Dalai Lama said, we should at least try to, if we're going to be selfish, let's be wisely selfish. And this is an expression of our practical wisdom of how we can be wisely selfish with ourselves into learning to love ourselves. So, comment?
Jampa, Barbara has a question.
Hi, Jampa. This teaching is fabulous for me, by the way. And I don't have a question, but what I was thinking as you were talking is if each one of us had that abiding love and compassion for ourselves, there would be no conflict. There would be no conflict in relationships and in families and in it would go away.
It would be a natural byproduct.
It would.
Yeah, I agree. So what's the problem?
Well, that's part two of what you're going to teach us, right? What those obstacles are, because again, that's our basic nature. I really feel that, and it's just all the obstacles that are in our way, and they're different for everyone.
Yeah, no, I agree. I
So
think
those were just some thoughts I was having as you were talking.
Okay, I appreciate you sharing them, and I think they're spot on. I think what you said is quite correct. I agree. And the other, what do you think about Barbara's comment? Richard, you want to say something?
Yeah, I just was say I agree with what Barbara's saying, and obviously she's never met my family, so it would be hard to deal with all that. And I it's hard. I understand what you're saying about loving thyself and cherishing oneself, and it's hard because you think that that's kind of the root of the problem of attachment is being attached to yourself. And so it's almost contradictory in some aspects. So it's kind of a hard to, I get where you're going to, and it's probably more subtle than how I've thought about it in the past. So I appreciate you bringing that up. But it at first it feels a little contradictory to how you're, in my mind, how Buddhism is supposed to go. So again, it's just helpful. There's lots of these that I've come up with. So, but I appreciate you bringing that up.
I think it's an excellent comment, Richard. I think there is a tendency, if I'm going to be a good Dharma practitioner, I shouldn't think about myself. I should forego myself and my own needs, my own desires, and so forth. And certain emotions and feelings aren't allowable in certain way, but I don't think it's there. I think it's our misinterpretation. Yeah, I can identify with what the comments that you just made. But and hopefully, that's why for example, I quoted the Buddha, I quoted the Dalai Lama. I have to go to some kind of authority. I'm not saying that's enough, but it's something that we can maybe begin to reevaluate, question some of our orientation and how we've come to practice. Not, we are as worthy of love. We are sentient beings. We are included in all sentient beings in some way or another. It doesn't exclude ourselves. when we talk about for the sake of all sentient beings, and that includes ourselves. I don't know. I like the image of just putting your arm around your shoulder and giving yourself a hug and I like you. How can I help you? There's something very touching about that. Maybe, I don't know, I don't want to get overly into Western psychology or whatever, but sometimes there's this little child that needs our help, and that needs to feel included in our life projects in some way, that he hasn't been left, or she hasn't been left behind in our traveling the path. And the other,
Barbara has another question.
okay.
The only comment that I was thinking about, and Richard, this was pertaining to you when you were talking, and I get that. And when I have thoughts of, oh gosh, I don't, that doing that is being selfish or whatever, what is really hopeful to me is I cannot give what I don't have. It's very basic for me. So if I don't have love for myself, how can I possibly love someone else? If I don't have patience with myself, if I, all of the things, there's no way. If you don't have that, if you don't possess that, you can't give it. It's like children when they're young, they need to possess their toys, so that they can learn to give them away, to share them. To me, it's a real basic thing that if I don't have it, I can't give it.
So the more we have, the
Right.
more we have to give. Yeah.
Yeah.
Richard?
Just a good point.
Good point.
Jay, do you want to unmute?
I am unmuted. Okay. Look, my first comment is, Barbara, for heaven's sakes, please go to the United Nations and tell them how to do world peace. Please. It's needed. And you've got the answer. Thank you. I really appreciate that.
No, I don't. But Jampa has the answer. That's coming next in this teaching.
Oh, okay. All right. And all right, they're going to lower my hand. All right. Now, the other thing I was going to say is that I'm very fond of doing Tan Lin. Part of the reason is because I can't do anything practical in the world, so I might as well try to solve it by sending out, positive thoughts, right? But that my ability to do that has increased when I got the drift that, I got to Tan Lin myself first. And then my heart is so much more open and much more relaxed, and it's much easier to do. So I wanted to chip that in. Thank you.
Thank you, Jai. Yeah, I appreciate it. Yeah, practicing Tonglen on yourself. I think is a very valuable practice. Showing that you care. We matter to ourselves, don't we? I hope I'm not misguiding you in any way, misleading you, getting you off the bodhisattva path, as it were. But this is just my, I don't know, the practicalities of examining in my own life what's worked, what has been a benefit, and how, I think I'm a better person, both for myself, but also for others, and if only in limited ways. So, just, as I said, some sharing this with others. And that's what a Sangha is all about, isn't it? Or I think ideally, as I mentioned before, sharing our practical wisdom that we've gained over our own experience and reflections and studies and so forth. We're almost out of time. So if there are there any other comments that you'd like to make before we... I have a dedication prayer that I especially like to make use of. So if there are no comments or questions or before we end, we almost got to the first immeasurable, which is par for me in a way. I'm sorry, but okay. So we've created a lot of. I'm going to share the screen again. We've created a lot of positive energies together, and we can. As Lama Yeshe was fond of saying, we can dedicate to our own piece of chocolate cake, or we can have a higher aspiration than that. But we also let go. You know, this notion of merit can be like most things in terms of our spiritual practices, can be subordinated to our materialism. You know, like building up a bank account of merit. So we give it all away. That's part of our practice. And so we'll be dedicating. Not just for our own piece of chocolate cake, for maybe a better world in some way. It's a troubled world, obviously. It's what's going on in Gaza and Ukraine and Sudan and what to say of our own backyards. It's tragic. And maybe we can become part of the solution rather than part of the problem. At least we can wish we were, if nothing more. And that's something in itself, a sincere wish. So if you'd like to, this is from Shantideva's Guide to the Bodhisattva's Way of Life. May all beings everywhere, plagued by sufferings of body and mind, attain an ocean of happiness and joy by virtue of my merits. May no living creature suffer, commit evil, or fall ill. May no one be afraid or belittled with a mind weighed down by depression. May the blind see forms and the deaf hear sounds. May those whose bodies are worn with toil be restored and finding repose. May the naked find clothing, the hungry find food. May the thirsty find water and delicious drink. May the poor find wealth, those weak with sorrow find joy. May the forlorn find hope, constant happiness and prosperity. May there be timely rains and bountiful harvests. May all medicines be effective and wholesome prayers bear fruit. May all who are sick and ill quickly be freed from their ailments. Whatever diseases there are in the world, may they never occur again. May the frightened cease to be afraid, and those bound be freed. May the powerless find power, and may people think of benefiting each other. So thank you for making what's my morning in Sydney worthwhile. Otherwise I would have probably just laid around and slept or something. Thank you for that, and hope to see you next week, and we'll go further, hope, along the path.
Thank you, Jampa.